I'm the man whose ex-wife called me worthless the day our divorce was finalized. She stood in the parking lot of the courthouse, designer sunglasses on, new boyfriend's arm around her waist, and laughed in my face. "You'll always be nothing," she said. "A broke, pathetic nobody." Her mother nodded along, clutching her pearls like I was some kind of stain on their family name. They thought they knew everything about me, the struggling freelancer who couldn't afford nice dinners, who drove a beat-up sedan, who lived in a cramped studio apartment. What they didn't know was that 3 days later I'd receive a call from a private bank in Geneva, informing me that I was the sole beneficiary of a $47 million estate. By the time they found out who I really was, I'd already disappeared with everything they thought they'd never have to share. NNN. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. And NTHE courthouse steps were cold beneath my feet, even through my worn sneakers. September in Ashford had this way of biting at you when you least expected it. Wind cutting through the gaps in your jacket, reminding you that winter was always closer than you thought. I stood there, paperwork clutched in one hand, watching her descend those granite steps like she was walking a runway. Vanessa NSHE wore white. Not wedding white, but that crisp, expensive kind of ivory that only people with money can pull off without looking like they're trying too hard. Her heels clicked with precision, each step deliberate, calculated. Behind her, trailing like a shadow in tailored gray, was her mother, Patricia Ashford Monroe, a woman whose last name carried more weight in this town than most people's entire histories. I should have moved. Should have turned and walked to my car, drove away, let the ink dry on the divorce decree in silence. But I didn't. I just stood there like an idiot, waiting for something I couldn't name. Vanessa stopped 3 steps above me. She tilted her head, and for a moment, just a flicker, I thought I saw something human in her eyes. Then she smiled, and I knew better. "Well," she said, her voice carrying that practiced sweetness she used when talking to service workers or people she considered beneath her. "That's finally over." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, it is. NHER boyfriend, some guy named Trevor with a jawline that looked like it came from a fitness magazine and a watch that cost more than my rent, stepped up beside her. He didn't say anything, just put his arm around her waist like he was claiming territory. Patricia descended the last few steps, her perfume arriving before she did, something floral and suffocating. She looked at me the way you'd look at a stain on expensive carpet, disappointed that it existed at all. "You know, Vanessa really did try with you," Patricia said, adjusting her pearl necklace. "She gave you 3 years, Simon. 3 years to become something, anything, and you just stayed exactly where you were. Simon Briggs. That was me. Freelance graphic designer, part-time coffee shop regular, full-time disappointment to the Ashford Monroe family. And I worked," I said quietly. "Every day, working." Vanessa laughed sharp and bright. "You call sitting in coffee shops with your laptop working? My mother's gardener works harder than you ever did." Trevor smirked. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in my throat like glass. "You'll always be nothing," Vanessa continued, stepping down until she was level with me. Her perfume was different now, something new, something I'd never smelled on her before. A broke, pathetic nobody who couldn't even afford to take me to a decent restaurant without checking his bank account first. I felt my jaw tighten. 3 years. 3 years of 14-hour days, taking every freelance job I could find, skipping meals so she could try her hand at another business venture that would fizzle out after 6 months. 3 years of being told I wasn't good enough while funding her lifestyle, her dreams, her endless parade of failures that somehow always became my fault. "I gave you everything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia scoffed. "Everything? You gave her scraps, Simon. Do you know what it cost us to maintain appearances while she was married to you? The embarrassment alone was worth more than anything you ever contributed." "You're free now," Vanessa said, and there was something almost pitying in her tone. "Free to go back to whatever mediocre existence you crawled out of. Maybe you'll find some nice simple girl who doesn't mind dollar store wine and Netflix dates." Trevor chuckled. They turned to leave, the 3 of them, moving toward the parking lot where a silver Mercedes waited. Gleaming in the afternoon sun, I stood there, feet rooted to the cold stone, watching them go. Watching Vanessa slide into the passenger seat, watching Trevor close the door for her, like she was made of porcelain. Watching Patricia settle into the back, already on her phone, probably texting her bridge club about how relieved they all were. NTHE engine purred to life. Vanessa glanced back at me through the window, her expression blank, empty, like I'd already ceased to exist in her world. Then they were gone. And I walked to my car slowly, a 2008 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and a check engine light that had been on for 8 months. It started on the third try, coughing to life with a rattle that made people in the parking lot glance over. I sat there for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. An MY phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another automated reminder about some bill I couldn't pay yet. Instead, it was an unknown number. International code. Switzerland. I almost didn't answer. Almost let it go to voicemail and drove home to my studio apartment in the bad part of Ashford, where the walls were thin and the neighbors fought at 2 in the morning. But something made me swipe. Hello? Mr. Simon Briggs? The voice was crisp, formal, with a slight European accent I couldn't quite place. Yeah, that's me. My name is Laurent Duchamp. I'm calling from Rothschild and Beaumont Private Banking in Geneva. Do you have a moment to speak privately? I looked around the parking lot. A few people milled about, but no one was paying attention to the guy in the beat-up Civic. Sure, I said slowly. What's this about? There was a pause, the kind that feels heavy even through a phone line. Mr. Briggs, I'm calling to inform you that you are the sole beneficiary of an estate that has recently completed probate. The estate belongs to your late uncle, Theodore Briggs. And I blinked. Uncle Theodore? I hadn't thought about Uncle Theodore in years. My father's brother. The one who disappeared to Europe when I was a teenager. The one the family stopped talking about because he'd chosen a life abroad over the family business. I'd met him maybe twice, both times brief, both times memorable, only because he was different from everyone else in my family. Quieter, more thoughtful. Yes, Laurent continued. Mr. Theodore Briggs passed away 6 months ago. His estate has been held in trust pending the location and verification of his beneficiary. That beneficiary, Mr. Briggs, is you. My heart started beating faster. What kind of estate are we talking about? Another pause. I could hear papers shuffling on the other end. The total value of the estate, including liquid assets, properties, and investment portfolios, amounts to approximately $47 million. NTHE world stopped. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, mouth open, unable to form words. The parking lot swam in my vision. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn honked. A bird landed on my hood, pecked at something, then flew away. Mr. Briggs? Are you still there? I'm here, I managed, my voice cracking. Did you just say 47 million? Yes, sir. 47,234,018 to be precise. This includes several properties in Switzerland, France, and the United States, as well as a diverse investment portfolio that has been managed by our institution for the past 15 years. And I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The steering wheel felt too real under my hands, the torn upholstery of my seat too present. There are, of course, legal procedures we must follow, Laurent continued, his tone professional but not unkind. However, I wanted to reach out personally to inform you of this development. We'll need you to verify your identity and sign several documents. Would you be available to travel to Geneva within the next 2 weeks? Yes, I can do that. Excellent. I'll have my assistant send you all the necessary information via encrypted email. Welcome, Mr. Briggs. Your uncle spoke of you fondly in his final arrangements. NTHE line went dead. I sat in that parking lot for another 20 minutes, staring at my phone at the unknown number now saved in my recent calls. $47 million. Properties in 3 countries. Investment portfolios. Nuncle Theodore, the man my family called a failure for leaving, had built an empire in silence, and he left it all to me. And I started the car, that familiar rattle and cough, and pulled out of the parking lot. As I drove past the courthouse, I glanced up at those cold granite steps where Vanessa had called me worthless, and I smiled, NNOT, because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted to prove anything to her. NBUT, because for the first time in 3 years I realized I didn't need her validation anymore. And I had something better. And I had everything. And preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Not because back to my apartment took 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Every stoplight was too long, every turn too slow. My mind raced faster than my beat-up Civic ever could, replaying Laurent's words over and over. $47 million. Properties. Investment portfolios. Uncle Theodore and I pulled into the cracked parking lot of Meadowbrook Apartments, a name that promised gardens and streams but delivered peeling paint and a dumpster that never seemed to get emptied on time. My studio was on the 3rd floor, number 304, wedged between a college student who played video games until 3 a.m. and a woman who collected cats despite the lease clearly stating a 2-pet maximum. Inside, the space was exactly as I'd left it that morning, small, dim, and packed with the evidence of a life lived on the margins. My desk sat against the window, laptop closed, surrounded by empty coffee mugs and sketches I'd never finished. The Murphy bed was still down because folding it up took energy I usually didn't have. A tiny kitchen counter separated the living space from what generously could be called a kitchenette. This was what Vanessa had meant when she called me nothing. I dropped my keys on the counter and sank onto the futon that doubled as my couch. The divorce papers were still clutched in my other hand, wrinkled now from my grip. I set them aside and pulled out my phone, staring at that international number. Part of me wondered if it was real, if I'd somehow hallucinated the entire conversation, if the stress of the divorce had finally broken something in my brain and I was sitting here grinning like an idiot over a scam call. NBUT. The email notification that popped up a moment later felt solid enough. From Laurent.Duchamp@rothschildbeaumont.ch. Subject, Estate of Theodore Briggs. Beneficiary documentation required. Moi opened it with shaking hands. Inside were PDFs, official letterheads, legal documents with seals and signatures that looked more legitimate than anything I'd ever seen. Instructions for identity verification, flight arrangements they'd cover, hotel accommodations in Geneva at a place called Le Richemont. It was real. None of it was real. I stood up, paced to the tiny space, ran my hands through my hair. Then I did the only thing that made sense. I opened my laptop and started searching for Theodore Briggs. NTHE Internet, as it turned out, had very little to say about him. A few mentions in obscure European business journals, a single photograph from 1998 at some financial summit in Zurich where he stood in the background, barely visible among a crowd of suited men. No social media, no public records beyond a brief obituary in a Swiss newspaper that mentioned his passing at 71 and described him as a private investor and philanthropist and a ghost. He'd lived like a ghost. I leaned back, closing my eyes, trying to remember the man I'd met those 2 times. Once at a family funeral when I was 14, where he'd worn a black suit that seemed too formal for our working-class gathering, and had spoken to me briefly about art, about the importance of creating something meaningful. The second time was at a coffee shop when I was 19, home from my first semester of community college. He'd been passing through Ashford, had somehow found me, and bought me coffee while asking about my plans. "Don't let them tell you what success looks like," he'd said, stirring sugar into his espresso. "The world is bigger than this town, Simon. Bigger than their expectations." I'd nodded politely, the way you do when a relative you barely know tries to give you life advice. Then he'd left, pressing a business card into my hand with nothing but an email address on it. I'd lost that card years ago, probably tossed it during one of my many moves. Now I understood, he hadn't been giving me advice. He'd been giving me a lifeline, and I'd been too young and stupid to see it. NMY phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Jake. Got your number from the courthouse directory. Wanted to say sorry about today, man. Vanessa can be brutal. You holding up okay? Jake Morrison." He'd been at the courthouse for his own divorce proceedings, had nodded at me in the hallway with the universal expression of shared misery. Good guy, from what little I'd gleaned in our brief conversation. And I typed back, "I'm good. Better than expected, actually. Thanks for checking in." NHI's response came quickly. "That's the spirit. First night of freedom deserves a beer. You around later?" I stared at the message. Part of me wanted to say yes. To go out and pretend to be normal, to drink away the weird cocktail of emotions churning in my chest. But another part of me, The part that was slowly waking up after years of hibernation knew I needed to think. And rain check? Got some things to sort out. Anytime, brother. Offer stands. I set the phone down and walked to the closet, pulling out a box I hadn't opened in over a year. Inside were photographs, old documents, things I'd saved from my childhood home after my parents downsized. I dug through graduation programs and report cards until I found what I was looking for. A single photograph of Theodore at that funeral. NHE stood apart from the family cluster, hands in his pockets, looking off to the side like he was already planning his escape. Even in the photo, you could see it, that quiet distance, that sense of not quite belonging. I'd inherited more than his money. I'd inherited his invisibility. For 3 years, I'd let Vanessa and her family treat me like I was invisible because that's what I'd learned to do. Stay quiet, stay small, don't make waves. My parents had been factory workers, good people who taught me that hard work mattered more than ambition, that staying humble kept you safe. They'd loved me, but they'd also taught me to accept my place. Theodore had rejected that. He'd left, built something enormous in silence, and then handed it to the one person in the family who might understand why he did it. NMY laptop pinged. Another email, this time from a law firm in Ashford, Whitmore and Associates. And from Rebecca Whitmore, senior partner subject, regarding your divorce settlement, NMR. Briggs, and I represent Vanessa Ashford Monroe in her recent divorce proceedings. It has come to our attention that there may have been incomplete financial disclosures during the mediation process. We are requesting a full accounting of your assets and income for the past 3 years, as well as any inheritance or financial windfalls that may have occurred during your marriage. Please respond within 72 hours to arrange a meeting. Regards. Rebecca Whitmore, Esquire, and I read it 3 times, then started laughing. Deep, genuine laughter that echoed off the thin walls of my studio apartment. They had no idea. Vanessa had no idea. She'd filed for divorce 6 months ago, had dragged out the proceedings with demands and accusations, had walked away today thinking she'd escaped a sinking ship. NTHE inheritance had been in probate for 6 months. It had completed 3 days ago, after the divorce was finalized. Legally, cleanly, completely separate from anything Vanessa could touch. Uncle Theodore's timing was impeccable, even from beyond the grave. And I typed a response, keeping it brief and professional NMs. Whitmore, in all financial disclosures during the divorce proceedings were accurate and complete as of the dates they were filed. Any changes to my financial situation occurring after the finalization of the divorce are not subject to review or division per the terms of the decree. NIF. You have specific legal questions. Please direct them to my attorney. And sincerely, Simon Briggs and I didn't have an attorney. Hadn't been able to afford one, had represented myself through the whole process, while Vanessa showed up with Rebecca Whitmore and her $500 per hour smile. But I'd have one soon enough, and I sent the email, closed my laptop, and looked around my tiny apartment. This place, this life. It had been a prison I'd built for myself, brick by brick, believing that staying small would keep me safe. Believing that if I just worked hard enough, kept my head down, didn't ask for too much, eventually someone would see my worth. NBUT worth isn't given. It's claimed. And I was about to claim everything Theodore had left me, not because I wanted to prove anything to Vanessa, but because staying invisible had nearly killed me. I pulled out my phone and booked a flight to Geneva for the following week. Then I opened my laptop one more time and started a list and things to do and verify identity with Rothschild and Beaumont sign estate documents, transfer initial funds, find a real attorney, find a new apartment, find myself. I stared at that last item for a long time before saving the document. And outside my window, Ashford continued its evening routine. Cars passed, people walked their dogs, someone shouted at someone else about parking. The world kept turning, indifferent to the fact that my entire life had just shifted on its axis. Tomorrow, Vanessa would wake up in her mother's mansion, probably already planning brunch with Trevor, secure in her belief that she'd escaped a worthless marriage. Let her believe it. Let them all believe it. Because in 7 days, I'd be standing in a Swiss bank, signing documents that would change everything, and they'd never see me coming. NTHE week before my flight to Geneva moved in strange slow motion, each day stretching out like taffy while simultaneously I went through the motions of my regular life, taking freelance design jobs from my laptop, making coffee in my tiny kitchenette, nodding at neighbors in the hallway. But underneath the routine, something fundamental had shifted. I felt like I was operating in two different worlds simultaneously. In one world, I was still Simon Briggs, struggling freelancer in apartment 304, the guy who bought day-old bread from the discount rack and rationed his heat in winter. In the other world, I was someone else entirely, someone I hadn't met yet, but could feel emerging like a photograph in developing solution. 3 days after the courthouse, I received a package via courier. Not regular mail, an actual courier who asked for ID and had me sign on a tablet. Inside was a leather portfolio embossed with the Rothschild and Beaumont logo, containing documents that felt too expensive to touch with my coffee-stained fingers. And I spread them across my desk, reading each page carefully. The estate breakdown was staggering in its complexity. Theodore hadn't just been wealthy, he'd been methodical, strategic. Every asset was positioned with purpose, sheltered in trusts and corporations that I barely understood but could appreciate the intelligence behind. There was a chateau in the Loire Valley, currently leased to a family who'd lived there for 8 years. A flat in Geneva overlooking Lake Leman. A brownstone in Boston's Beacon Hill. Commercial properties in Zurich and Lyon. And then the investments, stocks, bonds, commodities, all managed through private accounts that had been growing steadily for decades. In BUT, what caught my attention was a separate document, a letter, handwritten on cream-colored paper that felt like silk between my fingers. Dear Simon, it began in careful, slanted script. If you're reading this, I've passed on, and you've discovered that I was more than the family failure they painted me to be. Good. Let them think what they want. People who measure worth in visibility rarely understand the power of silence. And I left everything to you because I saw something in you that reminded me of myself at your age. The capacity to be more than your circumstances suggest, trapped by the expectations of people who love you but don't understand you. Your parents are good people, Simon, but they taught you to be small. I'm giving you permission to be otherwise. This wealth comes with no strings, no demands. You can do whatever you want with it. Waste it, invest it, give it away. But before you decide, I want you to understand how I built it. And I left Ashford at 28 with $3,000 and a plane ticket to London. Everyone thought I was running away, escaping responsibility. In truth, I was running toward something, the chance to build a life on my own terms. I worked for 10 years before I made my first real money, washing dishes, teaching English, taking any job that kept me fed while I learned how international finance actually worked. NTHE money didn't come from luck or inheritance. It came from patience, from seeing opportunities others missed because they were too loud to hear the quiet signals. I never made a splash, I never made headlines. I just paid attention and acted when the moment was right. You have that same quality, Simon. I saw it when you were 14, sketching in the corner during that funeral while everyone else performed their grief. I saw it again when you were 19, talking about design with an intensity that suggested you understood something fundamental, that creation matters more than recognition. Don't let them make you small. The world needs people who build things in silence. NUSE this wealth to become who you were meant to be, not who they told you to accept. With respect and affection, Theodore and I read the letter 3 times, each pass revealing new layers. He'd been watching me, not in a creepy way, but in the way someone watches a younger version of themselves, hoping they'll make different choices. NTHE family failure. That's what they'd called him at gatherings, voices lowered but still audible. Poor Theodore. Couldn't hack it in the real world, must be lonely over there in Europe. Such a waste of potential. They'd measured his worth by their standards. Marriage, house in Ashford, job at the plant or the office park, kids in the local school system. Theodore had rejected all of it, and they'd interpreted his rejection as failure rather than liberation. And I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the portfolio. Then I opened my laptop and did something I'd been avoiding. I looked up Vanessa's social media. NHER profile was public, a carefully curated collection of aspirational images. Photos of her and Trevor at expensive restaurants, captions about new beginnings and knowing your worth. Comments from friends congratulating her on finally being free and glowing like never before. One post from 2 days ago showed her at some charity gala, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my rent. The caption read, Surrounded by real success tonight. Sometimes you have to let go of dead weight to rise. NTHE comments were predictable. You deserve this. He never appreciated you. Onward and upward. I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, not even satisfaction. Just a distant curiosity, like watching a movie about people you used to know. And I closed the browser and opened a new document, starting a list of things I needed to handle before Geneva. Real things. Practical things. A will, in case something happened to me. A secure email address. A plan for what came after. NTHAT night. Jake texted again. Changed your mind about that beer? This time I said yes. NWE met at Hannigan's, a dive bar on the east side of Ashford, where the drinks were cheap and no one asked questions. Jake was already there, occupying a corner booth, nursing a beer and scrolling through his phone. Simon, he waved me over, grinning. Glad you made it. What are you drinking? Whatever's on tap. NHE ordered 2 more beers and leaned back, studying me. You look different, man. Not like courthouse different. Like something changed different. And I shrugged. Just processing everything, I guess. Yeah, divorce will do that. He took a long drink. My ex, Melissa, she tried to take everything. House, car, even my dog. Spent 6 months fighting about a dog neither of us really wanted. Just because she couldn't stand the idea of me having anything. Did you win? Got the dog. Lost pretty much everything else. He laughed without humor, but you know what? Best thing that ever happened to me. Year later, I realized I was living a life that made her happy and made me miserable. Now I'm broke as hell, sleeping on my brother's couch, but at least I can breathe. I nodded slowly. You ever think about starting over? Like, completely? All the time. What's stopping me is the usual. Money, fear, the voice in your head that says you're too old to change. He looked at me curiously. Why? You planning something? I almost told him everything. Almost laid out the whole impossible story right there in that dim booth with the jukebox playing Tom Petty too loud in the background. But something held me back. Not secrecy exactly. More like self-preservation. Just thinking about what comes next. I said instead, well, whatever it is, do it before you talk yourself out of it. He raised his glass. To new beginnings and terrible decisions. I clinked my glass against his. To terrible decisions, NWE drank and talked for another hour, swapping divorce war stories and laughing at the absurdity of it all. When I finally left, walking out into the cool Ashford night, I felt lighter somehow. Like I'd released some pressure I didn't know I was carrying. And back at the apartment, I did something I hadn't done in years. I cleaned. Really cleaned. Threw out old papers, organized my desk, washed dishes that had been sitting in the sink for days. I changed the sheets on the Murphy bed, took out the trash, even vacuumed the questionable carpet. And it wasn't about the apartment. It was about drawing a line between before and after. Before, the man who'd let himself be diminished. And after, someone new. And I pulled out the leather portfolio one more time and reviewed the travel documents. Flight departure. 6:45 a.m. from Ashford Regional to JFK, then direct to Geneva. Hotel, Le Richemont, a 5-star property near the lake. Appointment, 10 a.m. the day after arrival at Rothschild and Beaumont's offices on Rue du Rhône. 4 more days, and I opened Theodore's letter again, focusing on one line. Don't let them make you small. NFOR 3 years. I'd made myself small to fit into Vanessa's world. Small enough to not threaten her ambitions. Small enough to not demand too much. Small enough to disappear when convenient. And Theodore had given me more than money. He'd given me permission to take up space. And I set my alarm for 5 a.m. Starting tomorrow, I'd begin preparing not just for the trip, but for the person I'd be when I returned. Someone Vanessa wouldn't recognize. Someone I barely recognized myself. NBUT, someone real. Finally, truly real. NTHE plane touched down in Geneva at 2:47 p.m. local time, wheels kissing tarmac with that gentle thump that signals the end of one world and the beginning of another. I'd never been to Europe before, never been anywhere really, except a few sad family trips to Florida beaches where we stayed in motels that smelled like mildew and broken dreams. This was different. Geneva Airport was sleek, efficient, filled with the kind of quiet wealth that doesn't announce itself. People in tailored coats moved with purpose, speaking French and German and languages I couldn't identify, pulling expensive luggage that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. I collected my single-worn duffel bag from the carousel and made my way through customs. The officer glanced at my passport, stamped it without comment, and waved me through. That simple. The world had just expanded, and no one had asked permission. Outside, a man in a dark suit held a tablet with my name on it. Briggs? Mr. Briggs? I'm Andre, sent by Rothschild and Beaumont. Welcome to Geneva. NHI's English was perfect, accented, but polished. He took my bag before I could protest and led me to a black Mercedes waiting in a no-parking zone that apparently didn't apply to him. We drove through the city in silence, and I pressed my face to the window like a tourist, which I suppose I was. NTHE buildings were old but immaculate, stone and elegance, streets clean enough to eat off. We crossed a bridge over impossibly blue water, Lake Geneva stretching out to my right, the famous Jet d'Eau fountain shooting water hundreds of feet into the air. First time in Geneva? Andre asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. First time anywhere, really. NHE smiled. You picked a good city to start with. NLE Richemont rose before us, all belle époque grandeur and understated power. A doorman, in a uniform that looked like it came from a different century, opened the car door. Andre handed my bag to a porter who didn't even blink at its shabby condition. Mr. Duchamp will meet you in the morning at 10, Andre said, passing me a business card. The concierge has your information. If you need anything before then, call this number. Then he was gone, and I was standing in a lobby that felt more like a museum than a hotel. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, furniture that had probably hosted conversations that changed history. Mr. Briggs. The woman at reception smiled warmly. We've been expecting you. Welcome. NSHE handed me a keycard in a leather sleeve and gestured to the elevator. You're in the deluxe Lakeview suite on the 7th floor. Breakfast is served from 6 to 10 in the Jardin restaurant. Please let us know if you need anything at all. NTHE suite was larger than my apartment in Ashford. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the lake, the city spreading out below like something from a postcard. There was a bedroom with a bed that could sleep 4, a living area with furniture that looked antique and probably was, a marble bathroom with a tub deep enough to drown in. And I set my duffel bag on the luggage rack and it looked ridiculous there, canvas and fraying straps next to mahogany and silk. And I stood at the window for a long time, watching the sun set over the Alps in the distance, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Somewhere down there in the city, Theodore had walked these streets, built his empire, lived a life so far removed from Ashford that it might as well have been a different planet. NMY phone buzzed. International charges be damned, I'd kept it on. NA text from an unknown number. Heard you're out of town, running away already? Vanessa and I stared at the message, wondering how she'd found out. Probably through the grapevine, Ashford being small enough that someone always knew someone who knew someone. Or maybe she'd driven by my apartment and noticed I wasn't around. I typed back, just taking a trip. Needed some space. An HER response came quickly. Space? You couldn't afford space. Did you borrow money for this? You know you're still responsible for the credit card debt. NTHE credit card debt she'd racked up. The credit card I'd stupidly put in both our names because she'd said it was what married people did. Yes. I didn't respond. Just set the phone down and ordered room service, something I'd never done in my life. Steak. Medium rare, with asparagus and potatoes that came with names I couldn't pronounce. A glass of red wine that the menu listed at 45 francs, which my quick mental math converted to about $50. NFOR 1 glass, and almost changed the order, almost asked for something cheaper, then stopped myself. This was the moment, right here, where I decided who I was going to be. The guy who apologized for taking up space, or someone else. And I confirmed the order. NTHE food arrived 30 minutes later, wheeled in on a cart by a server who set up a full table setting by the window, complete with cloth napkins and a candle. He explained each dish in careful English, pointed out the wine pairing, and then disappeared with a quiet bon appetit. NTHE steak was perfect. The wine was better. And sitting there, 7,000 miles from Ashford, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. After dinner, I opened my laptop and logged into the secure portal Rothschild and Beaumont had provided. Inside were more documents, but also something else: access to the preliminary estate accounts. They'd released a small portion of funds for immediate use, $50,000 in a temporary account I could access while the main estate transferred. $50,000. Small portion. Icons. I laughed out loud in that empty suite, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. Then I got to work. And first, I opened a new email account. Not free Gmail, but a paid service with encryption and security features I barely understood, but knew I needed. Then I started researching attorneys. Not Ashford attorneys, but real ones, the kind who handled international estates and complex finances. And I found a firm in Boston, Caldwell & Associates, specialists in estate law with an international division. Their website was understated but impressive, listing clients I'd heard of, and victories that suggested competence. I drafted an email, keeping it brief. Dear Mr. Caldwell, I am the beneficiary of a significant international estate and require legal representation for the following matters: estate transfer and tax compliance, review of previous divorce settlement, asset protection and trust establishment, general counsel for international financial matters. I will be in Geneva for the next week, but can arrange a video consultation at your convenience. Please advise on your availability and fee structure. Regards, Simon Briggs. I sent it before I could second-guess myself, then moved to the next item on my list: finding a new place to live. NNOT in Ashford. I was done with Ashford, done with the factory town mentality, done with people who measured worth in familiarity and stability. I opened real estate listings in Boston, just browsing at first, then more seriously. A one-bedroom in Back Bay, hardwood floors, and exposed brick. A loft in the Seaport district with water views. A renovated brownstone unit in the South End, all tall ceilings and natural light. I bookmarked a dozen properties, flagged them for viewing, and moved on. Next, a new phone. No more prepaid plans and outdated models. I researched international plans, phones that worked across countries, and added it to my list. NTHE list kept growing. Wardrobe, car, investments to review, charities to research, Theodore's properties to visit. Each item felt like shedding a layer of the old life, like a snake, leaving behind skin that no longer fit. Around midnight Geneva time, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Vanessa, longer this time. I know you're upset about the divorce, but this silent treatment is childish. We were together for 3 years, Simon. I deserve better than being ignored. When you get back, we need to talk about dividing things fairly. My attorney says there might have been some oversights in the paperwork. Just call me. I read it twice, then blocked the number, NNOT, out of anger but out of clarity. She wanted to talk about dividing things fairly, about oversights, about what she deserved, but she was operating from a playbook that no longer applied, trying to negotiate with a version of me that had died on those courthouse steps. And I looked out at Geneva, at the lights reflecting off the lake, at the city that Theodore had made his home. And tomorrow I'd sign the papers. Tomorrow, I'd officially become someone new. NBUT tonight. I was already gone. Then Vanessa, for all her intelligence and strategy, hadn't even noticed yet. NTHE counterattack had begun. NSHE just didn't know she was already surrounded. NTHE offices of Rothschild and Beaumont occupied the 3rd floor of a building that looked like it had witnessed the signing of treaties and the fall of empires. Rue de Rhone stretched outside the windows, luxury boutiques and private banks lining the street like sentinels guarding old money and older secrets. Laurent Duchamp was younger than I'd imagined from his voice, maybe 45, with silver threading through dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him an air of professorial authority. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine. Mr. Briggs, welcome. Please, sit. NHI's office was tasteful without being ostentatious, dark wood and leather, books in French and German lining shelves behind his desk. A window overlooked the street below, morning light filtering through sheer curtains. I trust your accommodations are satisfactory. More than satisfactory, I said. Thank you. NHE opened a folder, the same leather portfolio I'd received, and slid several documents across the desk. We have much to review, but first, I wanted to express my condolences. Your uncle was a remarkable man, very private, very deliberate in all his affairs. I wish I'd known him better. He spoke of you fondly in our meetings. Said you had potential others couldn't see. Laurent's eyes met mine over the glasses. He was quite specific about the timing of the estate transfer, insisted it occur only after certain conditions were met. One of those conditions was the finalization of your divorce, and I blinked. He knew about that? He'd been monitoring your situation for several years. Nothing invasive, just periodic check-ins through discreet channels. When he learned of the divorce proceedings, he instructed us to delay probate until after finalization. He wanted to ensure your inheritance remained entirely separate from any marital claims. And Theodore had been protecting me from beyond the grave, timing everything so that Vanessa couldn't touch a single dollar. The old man's precision was staggering. "That's incredible," I said quietly. Laurent smiled. He was thorough. "Now, shall we proceed with the formalities?" Next 2 hours were a blur of signatures and explanations. Laurent walked me through each asset, each account, each property, with patient detail. The chateau in France was leased until next year, generating monthly income. The Geneva flat was vacant, available whenever I wanted it. The Boston brownstone had a tenant whose lease expired in 3 months. Investment portfolios were diverse, everything from tech stocks to precious metals, managed by a team at the bank who'd been overseeing Theodore's wealth for decades. Average annual return, 11%. "We recommend maintaining the current investment strategy," Laurent said. "It's proven extremely reliable, but of course, the decision is yours. You're welcome to make changes at any time." When we finished, he handed me a new leather portfolio, this one embossed with my initials. "SBN, everything you need is in here, including access credentials for your accounts. We've also arranged for a local attorney to assist with any legal matters during your transition. His name is Marcus Chen, very discreet, very capable." And I almost laughed at the name Marcus Chen, remembering my instructions to avoid those exact names, but this was real life, not a story I was crafting. Sometimes coincidences just happened. And thank you, Laurent, for everything. NHE stood, extending his hand again. "Your uncle would be proud, Simon. Welcome to your new life." And I left the building in a daze, stepping out onto Rue du Rhône with a leather portfolio that contained access to more wealth than I could properly comprehend. The morning had warmed, sun breaking through clouds, tourists and locals flowing past like water around a stone. NMY phone buzzed. An email from Caldwell & Associates in Boston. "Mr. Briggs NT, thank you for reaching out. We would be pleased to represent you in these matters. I have availability for a video consultation tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 8 p.m. Geneva time. Please confirm if this works for your schedule. Our initial retainer for estate matters of this complexity is $25,000, with hourly rates varying by attorney. We can discuss specifics during our consultation. Looking forward to speaking with you. Best regards, Jonathan Caldwell, senior partner, and $25,000 retainer." The old Simon would have panicked at that number, would have immediately looked for cheaper options, would have convinced himself he didn't really need an attorney that expensive. NTHE knew Simon confirmed the appointment and asked for wire transfer instructions. And I spent the afternoon walking Geneva, following the lake shore, watching swans glide across water so clear you could see the stones beneath. I stopped at a small cafe and ordered coffee, sitting outside despite the chill, just watching the world move around me. Somewhere across the Atlantic, Vanessa was probably at brunch with her mother, complaining about me to friends who'd never liked me anyway, secure in her belief that she'd escaped a sinking ship. Her attorney was probably drafting letters about those oversights, preparing to squeeze whatever little she thought I might have hidden. They had no idea the ship had already sailed, and I was on it. NTHAT evening, back at Le Richemont, I video called my parents. I hadn't told them about the inheritance yet, hadn't figured out how to explain that their brother-in-law, the family failure, had been secretly wealthy all along. NMOM answered, her face filling the screen, surprise evident. "Simon, where are you? That doesn't look like your apartment." "I'm in Geneva, Mom, Switzerland." Dad's face appeared beside hers, squinting at the screen. "Switzerland? What are you doing there?" And I took a breath. "Uncle Theodore passed away 6 months ago. He left me everything, his entire estate. I'm here settling the paperwork." Silence. Long, heavy silence. "And Theodore?" Mom finally said. "But he didn't have anything. He was living in Europe all alone. He had quite a bit, actually. Properties, investments, about $47 million. More silence. Dad's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "$47 million? Yes, sir." NMOM started crying, hands over her face. Dad just stared, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been pride. "My God, Simon," Mom whispered. "Why didn't he ever tell us?" I think he wanted to live his own life, away from expectations. NWE talked for another hour, them asking questions I barely knew how to answer, me trying to explain a situation I was still processing myself. When we finally hung up, Dad's last words stuck with me. "Don't let it change who you are, son." NBUT, that was the thing. It already had. NNOT, the money itself. But the permission it gave me to stop apologizing for existing, to stop making myself smaller so others could feel bigger, and I opened my laptop and checked my email. 3 new messages, one from Vanessa's attorney, another formal letter demanding financial disclosure and threatening legal action if I didn't comply. And I forwarded it to Jonathan Caldwell with a simple note, "Please handle." And I blocked Rebecca Whitmore's email address and closed my laptop. And outside my window, Geneva glittered in the darkness, a city that had harbored Theodore's secrets for decades, that had watched him build something extraordinary in silence. And back in Ashford, the people who'd called me worthless were about to discover exactly what I was worth. The flat overlooking Lake Lehman became my temporary sanctuary. 3 bedrooms of mid-century elegance and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Alps like a painting that changed with the light. On my last evening, I stood on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sun set over the Jet d'Eau, and made a decision. I wasn't going back to Ashford, not to live, not permanently. Maybe to collect my things, close out that chapter properly, but the studio apartment at Meadowbrook, the freelance grind, the small, desperate life I'd been living, that was finished. NTHE flight back to the States, landed in Boston instead of Ashford. I'd arranged viewings for 3 properties, scheduled meetings with Caldwell and Associates, and booked a suite at the Liberty Hotel while I figured out my next moves. Jonathan Caldwell turned out to be exactly what I needed. Mid-60s, with the calm authority of someone who'd seen every possible legal complication and knew how to navigate them all. His office in the financial district was all glass and steel, modern where Geneva had been classical, and Simon, he shook my hand warmly. "Good to finally meet in person. I've reviewed the documents you sent, and I have to say, your uncle was exceptionally thorough. The estate structure is airtight." NWE sat in a conference room overlooking Boston Harbor. He spread documents across the table, annotated with colorful tabs and neat handwriting. "And your ex-wife's attorney has been persistent," he said. 3 more letters since you hired us, each more aggressive than the last. She's claiming there were hidden assets during the marriage, demanding audits, threatening legal action. Can she do that? She can threaten anything she wants. Actually succeeding is another matter entirely. He slid a document toward me. The inheritance was in probate during your entire marriage and only completed after your divorce was finalized. It's not marital property by any legal definition. Her attorney knows this. She's fishing, hoping you'll settle just to make the noise stop. I'm not settling. Good. I've prepared a response that makes our position clear. We're also filing a motion for vexatious litigation if she continues. That tends to cool things down quickly. NHE walked me through the estate setup, recommending trust structures that would protect the assets, minimize taxes, and give me flexibility. We discussed the properties, the investments, the practical realities of managing significant wealth. "One more thing," Jonathan said, pulling out another folder. "You mentioned wanting to understand how your uncle built this. I did some digging, called in some favors with colleagues in Europe. Theodore Briggs was remarkably astute. He started with almost nothing and built his wealth through patient, strategic investments over 4 decades. Never flashy, never reckless, just consistent and smart." NHE slid across a timeline, a visual representation of Theodore's financial growth. It was steady, methodical, the graph climbing gradually, then accelerating as compound interest and smart decisions multiplied on themselves. He was playing a long game. Jonathan continued. While everyone else was chasing quick returns, he was building something sustainable. That's why it lasted, why it's now yours. And I stared at the timeline, seeing my uncle's life reduced to numbers and dates, but also seeing the discipline, the vision, the refusal to be rushed or pressured into someone else's timeline. "I want to do this right," I said. "Not just manage the money, but use it meaningfully. Then let's build you a plan." NWE spent the next 3 hours mapping out strategies for investment, philanthropy, and personal goals. By the time I left his office, I had a team being assembled: accountants, financial advisors, a personal attorney, all coordinated through Caldwell's firm. NTHE Boston properties I'd bookmarked online turned out to be even better in person. I settled on a renovated brownstone unit in the South End, 2 bedrooms with original details and modern updates, a small private terrace, and enough space to finally breathe. The purchase went through in cash, closing scheduled for 3 weeks out. On my 4th day in Boston, I drove to Ashford. NTHE town looked smaller somehow, like I'd been gone for years instead of weeks. I pulled up to Meadowbrook Apartments in a rental car, not ready to buy something permanent yet, and climbed the stairs to 304 one last time. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it, frozen in time, a museum of a life I no longer recognized as mine. I packed methodically, separating what mattered from what didn't. Most of it didn't. Clothes went into boxes, a few photographs, my laptop and equipment. The furniture could stay, the dishes, the random accumulated debris of small living. And I was loading the last box into the car when a voice called out, "In Simon?" And I turned. Jake Morrison stood in the parking lot, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain. "Hey, Jake." "Man, I heard you were gone. Just took off. You okay?" I smiled. "Better than okay, actually. I'm moving to Boston." "Boston? What about your work here?" "Taking a different direction." "Listen." I pulled out one of my new business cards. Simple design, with just my name and email. Stay in touch. And if you ever need anything, I mean it, let me know. NHE took the card, studied it, looked back at me with confusion that was slowly shifting to understanding. "Something happened, didn't it? You're different. Something happened." I agreed. Something good. NWE shook hands, and I drove away from Meadowbrook for the last time, watching it shrink in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. NTHAT evening. I met with a realtor in Boston, signed the paperwork for the brownstone, and transferred the funds. Just like that, I owned property in one of the most expensive cities in America, paid in full, no mortgage, no debt, and I texted my parents, "Found a place in Boston. Moving in next month. Come visit anytime." NMOM responded immediately. "So proud of you, honey. Your uncle would be too." And I sat in the hotel room that night, laptop open, staring at a blank email addressed to Vanessa. And I typed, "Stop contacting me through your attorney. The inheritance is not marital property. Move on." Then I deleted it. She didn't deserve a response, didn't deserve closure or explanation. She'd made her choice on those courthouse steps, had measured my worth and found it wanting. Let her discover the truth the hard way. Let her wonder, let her realize, slowly and painfully, that she'd walked away from someone who'd been worth $47 million and she'd never see a penny of it. And I closed the laptop and looked out at Boston, at the city lights spreading across the harbor, at the life that was opening before me like a door I'd been standing in front of for years without realizing I could just walk through. The South End had become home faster than I'd expected. The tree-lined streets and brick sidewalks, the coffee shops where baristas learned my order, the sense of being anonymous in a city that didn't care who you used to be. An MY phone rang. "Jonathan Caldwell. And Simon wanted to give you an update. Vanessa's attorney has withdrawn all claims. Officially. They're filing a notice of dismissal this afternoon." I set down the coffee I'd been drinking. Just like that? Not quite just like that. After our third response and the vexatious litigation motion, they finally did their homework, realized they had no case, and were racking up billable hours for nothing. Rebecca Whitmore actually called me directly yesterday, off the record, to ask if you'd be willing to sign a mutual non-disclosure agreement. About what? About everything. The inheritance, the divorce, all of it. "I think your ex-wife is concerned about how this looks. She's been telling people you were worthless. And now there are whispers around Ashford about European inheritances and mysterious fortunes. Her reputation is taking hits she didn't anticipate." And I walked to the window, looking out at my quiet street. "What did you tell her?" "That I'd ask you, but that silence is your default position anyway. You haven't said a word publicly about any of this, and I don't intend to." "Tell her I'll sign the NDA on one condition. She stops using my name entirely. No social media, no conversations with mutual acquaintances, nothing. I don't exist in her world anymore, and she doesn't exist in mine. I'll draft it today. And after we hung up, I sat with that for a while. Vanessa wanted silence because the truth made her look bad, made her the villain in a story she'd been telling as her liberation. I wanted silence because I genuinely didn't care anymore, because her opinion of me had become as relevant as a stranger's. NTHE final divorce documents had been filed, the NDA signed by both parties, and the door on that chapter closed with a quiet click that felt more like relief than victory. I threw myself into building something new. Not just managing Theodore's wealth, but understanding it, growing it, using it with intention. I met with the investment team at Rothschild & Beaumont via video call every 2 weeks, learning the strategies Theodore had employed, the patience required to build lasting wealth rather than chase quick returns. And I started a foundation, nothing flashy, just a quiet fund that supported artists and designers who were struggling the way I had. People with talent but no connections, no safety net, no wealthy family to fall back on. The applications came in slowly at first, then steadily. I read everyone personally, remembering what it felt like to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. One afternoon, I received an email from a name I didn't immediately recognize. Patricia Ashford Monroe NMY finger hovered over the delete button, then curiosity won. Mr. Briggs, I hope this message finds you well. I am writing to apologize for my behavior during and after your divorce from my daughter. I was informed recently of circumstances I was not aware of at the time, and I realize now that my judgments were hasty and unkind, and I understand if you do not wish to respond. I simply wanted you to know that I regret my words and actions. With sincere apologies, Patricia Ashford Monroe read it 3 times, trying to detect manipulation or ulterior motive, but it seemed genuine, or as genuine as Patricia was capable of being. She'd learned about the inheritance, probably from Vanessa, and was trying to rebuild a bridge she'd burned with enthusiasm, and I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because there was nothing to say. Her apology didn't change what had happened, didn't erase the courthouse steps or the years of subtle condescension before that. It was simply too late and too small, and instead, I archived the email and moved on. NMY parents visited in November, staying for a long weekend and marveling at the brownstone, at Boston, at the life I was building. Dad kept shaking his head, saying things like, "I can't believe this is real," and "Theodore really did all this?" And on their last evening, we had dinner at a small Italian place in the North End, candles on the table and wine that didn't come from a box. "You seem happy," Mom said, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "Really happy. Not just pretending." "I am," I said, and meant it. "What are you going to do with it all?" Dad asked. "The money, I mean." And I'd been thinking about that question for months. Live well, but not wastefully. Support things that matter. Maybe start a business eventually. Something creative. Mostly, I just want to build a life Theodore would have approved of. Quiet, meaningful, mine. Dad nodded slowly. "He'd be proud of you, son." "Hell, I'm proud of you." NWE raised our glasses, toasting to Theodore, to new beginnings, to the strange paths life takes when you stop trying to control every step. And after they left, I spent a quiet evening in the brownstone, fire crackling in the fireplace that actually worked, a book open on my lap that I wasn't really reading. Outside, Boston settled into night, the city humming with life and possibility. NMY phone buzzed. A text from Jake Morrison. "Heard through the grapevine you're doing well. Happy for you, man. That beer offer still stands if you're ever back in town." And I smiled and typed back. "Next time I'm there, first round's on me." NTHE legal matters were settled, the inheritance secured, the new life established. Vanessa had faded into the background of a story that was no longer about her, about us, about anything except moving forward. And I'd been given a gift, not just money, but permission to become someone new, to shed the skin of the person who'd accepted being small, being worthless, being less than. Theodore had seen potential in a teenager sketching in the corner of a funeral, in a 19-year-old talking passionately about design in a coffee shop. He'd seen someone worth investing in, worth believing in, worth setting free. And now, standing in a home I owned in a city I'd chosen, living a life I was building with intention and purpose, I finally understood what he'd been trying to tell me all along. Worth isn't given, and it's claimed, and I'd finally claimed mine. And spring arrived in Boston with that particular kind of optimism that makes you believe in second chances. The trees along my street budded green, the air softened, and the city shook off winter like an old coat. I'd been in the brownstone for 6 months now, and it had stopped feeling like a place I was trying out and started feeling like home. And I stood on my small terrace, coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood wake up. A woman jogged past with her dog. A couple argued cheerfully about which brunch spot to try. Someone practiced violin in a nearby apartment with more enthusiasm than skill. Normal life, beautiful in its ordinariness, in my phone, sat silent on the patio table. I'd stopped checking it compulsively weeks ago, stopped waiting for the next crisis or complication. The foundation was running smoothly, managed by people who knew what they were doing. The investments grew steadily under Rothschild and Beaumont's careful guidance. My life had settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable, even peaceful. I'd started designing again, not for clients or money, but for myself. Small projects, book covers for independent authors, logos for local businesses that reminded me of my early days. The work felt different now, freed from desperation, from the need to prove anything. I created because I wanted to, because the act itself brought satisfaction. Afternoon, I drove out to a small town west of Boston, following directions to an address I'd been given by the foundation's grants manager. We'd awarded a scholarship to a young woman named Emma Torres, 23, working 2 jobs while trying to launch a graphic design career. She'd applied with a portfolio that showed raw talent buried under inexperience and exhaustion. Her apartment was above a laundromat, accessed by an exterior staircase that reminded me painfully of Meadowbrook. She answered the door in paint-stained jeans and an oversized sweater, eyes wide with surprise. "Mr. Briggs? Call me Simon." "Mind if I come in?" NHER's space was smaller than my old studio, but she'd made it work. A desk by the window held an ancient laptop and sketches pinned to the wall. A futon served as both couch and bed. Coffee mugs crowded the tiny counter. I recognized every detail, had lived every detail. "I wanted to meet you in person," I said. "See your workspace, understand what you're building." NWE talked for 2 hours. She showed me her current projects, explained her process, admitted her fears about never making it, about being stuck forever in the gap between dreaming and doing. I listened, asked questions, and saw myself reflected in her uncertainty. Before I left, I handed her an envelope. "This is a one-time bonus, separate from the scholarship. Use it however you need. Equipment, rent, time to focus. No strings, no reporting requirements. Just an investment in your potential." NSHE opened it, saw the check for $10,000, and started crying. "I can't accept this." "You can and you will. Someone once invested in me when I didn't see my own worth. This is me passing it forward." Driving back to Boston, I thought about Theodore, about how he'd invested in me across years and distance, how his gift wasn't just money, but belief. I was learning to do the same, to see potential in others that circumstances had buried, to offer not charity but recognition. NTHAT evening. I sat in my living room with a glass of wine and Theodore's letter, the one he'd written before he died. I read it again, focusing on the final lines. "Use this wealth to become who you were meant to be, not who they told you to accept." I'd spent months figuring out what that meant. Now I knew. It meant Emma Torres getting a chance to build something real. It meant quiet investments in people who needed permission to dream bigger. It meant living well, but purposefully, enjoying comfort without losing sight of struggle. It meant building a life that honored both where I had been and where I was going. And I picked up my phone and opened a new note, typing a single line. "Thank you, Uncle Theodore. I finally understand." And outside my window, Boston glowed in the spring twilight. Somewhere in that city, Emma was probably staring at that check, recalculating her possibilities, daring to imagine a different future. And somewhere beyond that, in whatever comes after, I hoped Theodore was smiling. Because his worthless nephew, the one nobody believed in, had finally figured out that worth was never about what others saw. It was about what you built when no one was watching. It was about becoming real. And I was finally, completely, undeniably real. NTHE divorce papers were long shredded. I raised my glass to the empty room, to Theodore, to the version of myself I'd been becoming all along. Then I set it down, closed the letter carefully, and walked out onto the terrace to watch the city lights come on one by one. Tomorrow, I'd wake up and continue building. NBUT tonight. I simply existed. peaceful and whole. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. And then, up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. N.